Vanakkam, Jain, everyone. In this episode of geopolitics, we'll have these videos more frequently from now on a very serious and important geopolitical topics. So, in this video, we are going to see about what's happening to our neighbor island nation, the Sri Lanka. So, we all know the protest has been going on since March, and the protest peaked somewhere in the last week of July and then first week of July, and then we saw the presidential house being swarmed in by protesters, and protesters took over the presidential house literally. And the president later fled from that place. He ran away to Maldives, and then from Maldives, as a transit, he has now placed himself in Singapore. Though even the Singapore government hasn't confirmed his exile officially, Singapore says that he has been on a private visit, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The other brother, Mahinda, is still in Sri Lanka. He has been removed from his prime ministership sometimes before, 2 months before. And there's another brother, the finance minister, Basil Rajapaksa, is in Sri Lanka. So today, one of the Sri Lankan court has ordered that they are both have been debarred from moving out of the country, which means clearly it says that they're going to face some sort of trial. All likely it would be corruption. So let's see where it all started. Four fundamental reasons. Most of you know what the story is all about. Why the nation has been in such a state today. The COVID, everybody says COVID is the reason for this country to fall. Yeah, COVID has affected all of us throughout the world. Many economies have been hit. Few countries whose economy is smaller in size, they have been affected, but not to the level of what Sri Lanka is today. A couple of it is self-made by their rulers and by the people as well. So let's see one by one what has actually happened and why this situation has arisen. So post 2009 Elam War, the Elam War 3, where the LTT was eliminated by the Sri Lankan government, which was headed then by Mahinda Rajapaksa. And the brainchild behind the entire operation was Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the ex-president right now. He was a military officer. He retired as a lieutenant colonel. Then later on, he was in intelligence, subsequently a minister, and then the president now. So he spearheaded the entire operation. He was famously addressed as the Terminator in their own country. And the people literally celebrated him. There's a high favor of nationalism which is going on in Sri Lanka. So from 2009 till date, firstly, the amount of money they've spent on war and the size of their army is huge. It's not proportionate to the country's income. It was short-sighted. There was no plan to actually do it. The amount of weaponry and amount of money spent on their military prowess was very, very high, which clearly made a dent in their deficit budget. This is already deficient. Now, why did they do this? To the ultimate reason they gave was to eliminate LTT, but in the process they ended up killing almost 3 lakh plus Tamil population there, the native Tamil who live there, and that scare has been not been wiped out. Time and again they have been pushed. Various countries have been pushing the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and Human Rights Commission, while human rights organizations to prosecute them for their war crimes. But nothing has happened. You know how the geopolitics work. Every country takes care of its own interest. So this was going on. And secondly, when Rajapaksas came to power after such a massive win over LTT, they started promising moon. And the closest one to their heart was Hambantota, which is the birthplace of native of this Rajapaksas. So when they actually had done this, when they actually had started this, so they went into a spending spree, a lot of commercially unviable projects, big projects like the Hambantota port. And then they gave a huge airport to that place, which hardly has any footfalls. The airport is capable of handling around, I think, 50,000 odd passengers footfall a day, which has not even has seen a footfall of more than 3 to 5,000. So these things went up and went on and on. And they went on taking Chinese loans, very, very lucrative Chinese loans. And secondly, because of the entire almost 25 from the Rajapaksa's family, or either directly in the government or hold some very, very important position in the decision-making bodies of the government, various ministries. So these entire family went on corruption mode. So they were highly corrupt. The dynasty, there was nobody to question the dynasty in their first rule. They're highly corrupt, and enormous amount of corruption happened in Lanka. So that also took a big hit on the economy, because corruption beyond a certain level is going to really kill your economy. So that was the second reason. Then these guys have done a very strategic blunder of taking India off the guard. So they became pro-Chinese. There were clear signals of them being pro-Chinese, and there are a lot of instances where they took an anti-India stand. So these things were going on. So the bilateral relation with India was deteriorating, and it's the rock bottom somewhere in 2019. And again came back to power. It was by then it has hit the rock bottom. In the interim, the Rajapaksas, basically, the Mahinda Rajapaksa is highly superstitious. So he has a spiritual guru or astrologer kind of a person whom he advises. Then one point of time he called for a snap poll, trusting that he will win a major win in that particular election. But they ended up in losing to his former health minister Maitreyi. And then this government was carrying on till 2019, where things changed again because of the bomb blast which happened in Easter bomb blast which happened in Lanka, where scores of hundreds of people died in that incident. So this time his political pitch was more on securing the nation, which is basically, if I would have been there, this bomb blast would have not happened, and we were the terminators of terrorism and so on. So, and he also promised moon to his people. Uh, just for the sake of power. They, at any cost, they wanted to come back to power. One such thing was to cut down GST by 50%. You just can imagine cutting down GST by 50%. There's already a revenue shortage. You spend more than what you earn, and you have taken billions of dollars of Chinese loans. You've already taken an anti-India stand, and also a kind of a partially an anti-US stand, a cold shoulder kind of thing, which with Lanka US relationship. And to nail it, now you make an election promise that I'll waive off 50% of GST, and then 30%, almost 20 lakh of people will go out of IT. Means that I increase the ceiling of the basic income, which should be taxed as per the Income Tax Act. So I will increase that so that a lot of people will go out of the tax ambit. Now, one side, your revenue is high, revenue is getting hit, and then it's already shrunk. Now you're shrinking it further for the sake of power. On the other hand, your spending is very, very high. By then, the big ticket projects like Hambantota, the airports, the solar fields, and the port cities, the western and the eastern Colombo port, all this has started ticking, which means that you have to pay the interest back to those Chinese companies, which they were failing to do so. So at this point of time, they already gave the Hambantota port in lieu of the interest payments which they did. It's smartly called as a 19-year lease, which means that you have disowned or you have actually sold out your a piece of your country, a very important port, and that has been taken over by Chinese. So post elections, as promised, he has waived off the GST for 50%. People were so happy. The income tax was reduced. People were so happy. There was a lot of charm and cheer. And then the world was hit by COVID. Now, Sri Lanka's four pillars of their economy is first is tourism. It's a very nice, beautiful island place. A lot of people, tourists visit there, especially from Europe. And the second income is their agricultural produce, is basically the spices segment. And third is their textile export, because they have tax credits, tax swaps for the European market. So a lot of the garment industry thrives there. So this three is the major revenue. Apart from that, their government's companies, the PSUs, the public sector units, were always loss making. For example, Sri Lankan Airlines, Air Lanka. So these are all loss making companies. None of them are under profit. What do they import? They import chunk of almost 100% of their fuel, which is the petrol and diesel. They import gas, and then they import food grains. So a lot of these stuffs are getting imported, and of course the Chinese communication devices like mobile phones and white goods and so on, so on, so. So now this entire thing, one is you're not focused on increasing your revenue. So by ways of taxation, which means you have to increase your tax base, but the other way you did the other way of decreasing it. Now hit the COVID. Now the tourist income has gone. the foreign money which was coming in, the foreign remittance or the foreign money, forex reserves which was coming in by means of tourists has completely gone off. Even before the COVID hit them, it hit all of us. Because of the Easter bombing, the security rating was reduced and it was declared to be an unsafe place by most of the countries. So people travel less. Now, this was happening. It was heading into a downfall. It was heading south at a very, very faster rate, much better, faster than anybody could expect it. But because it's a dynasty, it's a clear dynasty, nobody would like to go and speak to a dictator. The dictator always wants yes. So the most of the cabinet decisions, the country's strategic decisions were taken in the dining table. So there's actually no one to go and tell them. And even if they tell them, the family was in no mood to listen to them because the elder brother is the prime minister, younger one is the president, the finance minister, and so on. So the entire clan of Rajapaksa's dynasty was ruling them. Now, on top of this, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa goes to Gotabaya Rajapaksa goes to UN, and then in a forum, I think in Switzerland, he gave a very historical speech of how Sri Lanka is going to be the first organic country in the world. And please learn from Sri Lanka how we drive organic stuff, food security, sustenance, a lot of other things which they spoke. So what he did was he said stop the fertilizer subsidy because agriculture largely depends on this DAP and urea subsidies. So he completely stopped the fertilizer subsidies, and yeah, there's blanket ban on import of pesticides and fertilizers were done. By then, the farmers are already have sowed their seeds. They are about to cultivate their crop. Now, suddenly, you stop from inorganic farming and then you move into organic farming. So pesticide, so practically it doesn't work that way. Now what happens is, now has happened is their foreign money inflow is almost nil because of tourism. Now, instead of exporting food, you have started importing it because the agricultural output went down by 50%. That's really, really huge for a population of 4 crore people in the island nation. So when this got a hit, nobody could actually tell them. The farmers were suffering. A lot of traders, a lot of people who were selling those fertilizers were arrested. They were penalized. Their godowns were raided. So these things are going on. So from there they started importing food. When they started importing food, most of you know that it works on the principle called LC, letter of credit. You buy at a certain price when the dollar is on a given day, and then by then it reaches your home country. The dollar may go or up or down, but that's a hedging which people do. In this case, the government blamed the traders, the importers and the traders who were part of the supply chain, that these people were hoarding the grains, and that's because why the prices have gone up. We're going to crack down on them. And then the plenty of generals who are available for free now because there's no war for the past 12 years. So one of the generals were put on this thing. So he went and raided all the godowns. Basically, the traders and the importers were shown as a villain. They were the greedy people who were importing it and selling it at a higher price. But that's not the real case. It was actually the dollar rate which was continuously going up vis-a-vis the Sri Lankan rupee. When this is the faster, almost 80% of the journey is already covered. You are going to hit the rock bottom. The inflation went up, and now the final death line is what a typical government does. They have quality economy advices, but they are not heeded to them. They started printing currencies. They printed rupees and rupees, millions of Sri Lankan currency. They flooded the market, which in turn raised the inflation to unrealistic level of 20% plus. And then because there is no inflow, by then the COVID got over, the world slowly started coming back to its normalcy. So the chunk of the tourism which was expected to come back to Sri Lanka was not happening because the tourists basically come from, a chunk of the spending tourists basically come from Russia and Ukraine. These nations went on a war. Now there's no way you can increase you can regain your income in terms of tourism. What can save you is agriculture, that you have been killed by your pesticide and your ambitious organic farming projects. And third and the final one was your textile. Now, to run a textile industry, you need uninterrupted power, at least 16 to 17 hours of power a day. Because you are not able to pay back your dues to the oil companies and the countries you are importing the oil from. Now they slowly stopped because you're defaulting on loans. They slowly stopped sending oil to them. So without oil and without this thing, there's no power, and without power, there's no textile production. Without textile production, there's no exports. So you have actually killed those industries as well. Then Mahinda Rajapakse comes on TV. He speaks to the people directly. He says, "See, look, this is the best economic policy we could do. Why we went into organic farming was actually that we can will get better prices. You know, ours will be the luxurious and the most sought after product in the world. So that's why we moved into organic. Our practices are good. We are going to sustain. We are going to survive. You are humiliating my family. That is okay, but don't humiliate the heroes of the armed forces." Actually, there were no Lankans who were actually doing, in the sense they were abusing their armed forces. So this was very unstatesmanlike. His confidence was low. He was bitter, very bitter. He was very cold. So he don't know whom to blame, and he completely misread the people's sentiments. So Mahindra Rajapakse was forced to resign. Then Kotabaya takes the moral seat because they always play the good and the bad cop. So now Mahindra Rajapaksa is the root cause of all this. Now Kotabaya takes over. Now he is the president. He reluctantly agreed to appoint a prime minister who was Ranil Wickremesinghe. And then he said, okay, reluctantly, I will divulge the powers of a president. The president has the maximum power in that country. So when these things are going on, so the extreme right kind of politics which they did, the Buddhist monks, the religious establishments, overwhelming role in terms of government and decision making. So now the left got prompted up. The left supported parties, the left supporting parties, and the leftist mentality people, the extreme left wings, who are basically anti-establishment and anti-government. So they instigated the people. The people were becoming restless. They were patient. They ran out of their patience. That's the thing. Imagine you standing in a queue for a petrol for almost 2 to 3 days, and you still see the government vehicles and politicians playing in their cars. They don't wait because politicians are always privileged. Now, this privilege actually antagonized the people. They really got angry. The protest actually started in March in pockets. And it was not spread in the entire Lanka. It was basically restricted to the southern part of the Lanka, Colombo and the surrounding area. So these people got together. They were not used to such a kind of this thing. Because if you see, that's just before this protest and all, very funny survey done by a Western media said that their happiness index is 32. They're one of the most happiest country than India, Bangladesh, or any other country. Now, what kind of survey? We really don't know that. People have been suffering for their basic needs like food, water, and shelter, and then they still tend to be happy. That's what the survey says. So, at this juncture, we see the siege of the President House and people entering it. The mob has taken over. Those photographs have been viral. Most of you would have seen it. But the problem here is they are got in themselves into a complete mess. And the current scenario is like this. The protest is okay until unless it is democratic. You can't cross the boundary. The only way Sri Lanka can come out is by a huge Chinese loan, which will anyway sell the country completely off. The only decent option they have in with all this current set of lenders available to them is the IMF. Now, to speak to IMF, you need to have some sort of stable government, at least something like interim, which is more stable. And if you don't let the politicians work, or if you keep the mob, who is going to be in charge of the mob? If a government or a establishment has to go and speak, compromise, you call people to the negotiation table. Now, whom will you call to the negotiation table? That's the biggest question because it's a mob. And this mob is not entirely a people movement as it is been shown by the media. There are extreme left organizations, there are extreme radical organizations who are involved in this protest, and they have been trying to loot arms. A couple of sporadic violences have been reported here and there, and there's a lot of funding which comes, from the diaspora, from the external diaspora, and a couple of other intelligence agencies of the West who are interested in this to keep this country in boil. Because only then they'll be able to put in their own puppet government. That's where it's heading to. Now, even the opposition is split. Even today, they are split. If one takes up volunteers and becomes the president, the other will pull them down because their ideologies are very different and everybody wants to be in power. So until or unless the current protests end, people go back and then they have to, whether they like it or not, they have to trust the establishment at least for quite some time till such time they get the IMF aid, which is not happening. And today, these protests are more symbolic. They are propagated. They have been given the wide attention of media, especially the Western media, and it's been seen as a people movement. And Mr. Blinken, who's a foreign affairs secretary of U.S., on the very first day when this presidential siege house was sieged and protest was in, he said, "We are with the people of Sri Lanka." Now, quote unquote, listen to these words: "We are with the people of Sri Lanka." The same thing, and it happened with the Capitol House of US. When the Capitol House was sieged by the protesters, they said these are not protesters; they are thugs, rogues, and they are not. They don't reflect the common American sentiment. These people will be handled, and it's because of Trump's instigation. These people are racists, they're Republicans, uh, they are racist and whatnot. A lot of cases were filed across that, in the protest, aftermath of the protest. A lot of cases were filed. A lot of people were got jailed as well. So in your own country, if something like this happens, then it is not a protest. It's not a people's movement. When it happens to some other country, it becomes a people movement. So this particular stand is need to be watched out. Who exactly gains from this protest is what the Sri Lankan people have to think after seeing this video. Until unless you keep calm and let the establishment work, or if you're, it's an organized protest by some leader, the leader can be spoken with, the demands can be asked, the demands can be met. So until then, this protest is not going to help Sri Lanka in any way. The good things are going to go from bad to worse. If there is it's a lack of establishment or a headless chicken headed government in place, it's not going to work this way, the way the protests have been happening, instigated by this few people on road. A lot of their ex-MPs, their economic advisors have cautioned them. We have seen them that, these protests are not going to help us in any way. Protest is fine. Everybody should have the right to protest in a democratic setup, but the protest cannot, actually choke the system. You need to be in the system to win the system. So where do Sri Lanka will head from here? Their inflation is continuously increasing. There is no, I would say, zero tourism. So there's no income as far as tourism is concerned. There is no power, so textile industry cannot work. Agriculture is not suffice for the population they have, so there's no point of even thinking of exporting it. So three things can really work in this. One is the IMF bailout. Second is to have a very close, transparent, and a trustworthy relationship with India. India has already always have been their first responder. Even now, we have extended credit excess of 3.8 billion US dollars. So they need to build their country with the support of India. They don't require this big an army. They don't require this big a navy. India is their neighbor. We can take care of the maritime security. There's a BIMSTEC arrangement which speaks about that. They can rely on they can leverage on India's capability in terms of defense, maritime security, power, infrastructure, and technology. So these are the five major areas where they can take India's shared resource and then run the country in spite of creating everything on their own, because these are all going to take time and a lot of money. Second is they have to restart the country again, which means the power, and then they have to restart their industries. The tax basis has to be widened. People anyway have to pay back those money. So who is going to ultimately pay back these loans which Sri Lanka has already got, or they're going to get now? Ultimately, it's the people. People have to go, boot tight. They have to be acceptable and ready to pay more taxes in order to, pay back these loans and get the country out of it. And third is their traditional politics of this Tamil hate. You're free to hate, that's fine. But one thing you need to understand, Sri Lanka is about the power the Lankan Tamils have outside the country. They have a very strong diaspora. They have been entrepreneurs in Europe, in Canada, in US. They're successful. So these remittances will help you in a long way, provided you divulge or you give those power. The basic elections has to be held in North and East. You have to amend your 13th Amendment do the 13th Amendment of your Constitution, give more power to the people, let them run their own government, the state government, so-called we call in India, in your provincial government in Sri Lanka. They need to be empowered. Only then these people will come back to Sri Lanka, will start investing in Sri Lanka. Same goes for the Sri Lankan diaspora as well. So the diasporas also play a very, very important role. Foreign remittance is the easiest thing. We can see the cases in India, like Kerala and Punjab, high amount of foreign remittances does helps you a long way. If you continue with the hate politics and continue with the hate which you have been sown in your minds for the past almost 60, 70 years, the hate which have been cultured against India for so many years. All you need to understand is India is the first responder and the last responder till date, which has helped you. And from here on, this is not going to be a free business for as far as India is concerned. India will also, as recalibrated its foreign policy, India is also going to treat you with that we means business, but with the very, very good amount of humanity. But that humanity is not going to come for free. Once you restructure your country, if you start tagging Chinese line again, India is not going to sit and watch this particular thing. So please, I suggest, I advise, or I request the people of Sri Lanka to stay calm and to restructure the country. Forget the hate which your politicians have sowed in your minds, be it anti-India or be it anti-Tamil sentiments. Come together, sit together with Lankan Tamils, get the country restructured, and get back out. So we will have a Sri Lankan update maybe down 2 weeks. But from here to next 6 months, we really don't see, the light anywhere in the tunnel. So it's going to be a very treacherous, it's going to be a very tough journey for Sri Lanka. The last thing that people can do is to do a mob anarchy-based rule, which has been happening for the couple of last 6 7 days, which is not at all good for the country. So stay tuned. We'll come back with an update on Sri Lanka and other neighboring nations. Thank you, Jai Hind.